Hi, I'm Greg Thompson. After years of conducting interviews, I've found that when I can sit with friends one-on-one, the deepest questions of our spirituality and who we are as humans, and what we're discerning to be our purpose in life, just naturally rise to the surface. However, having recently come out as a gay man myself, people are often surprised that I still have faith at all. Being gay and being spiritual seem like a conflict of interest to others, but not to me. One of the first things I did when I came out was ask for help. I called friends who were gay and also raised Roman Catholic like me, and I listened to their stories. No one had found some secret formula for how to make these conflicting identities somehow get along, but I felt a camaraderie and a hope in just knowing that I wasn't alone. And it allowed me to come out fully to myself, and eventually to my family, and even in my church community. Welcome to Out Loud, a show for building that same camaraderie across wherever you identify on the queer spectrum and on the faith spectrum. At this intersection of faith and sexuality, we'll be hearing stories from LGBTQIA+ identifying individuals, and publishing them for others to hear and heal, share, and understand. On today's episode, we'll be talking with Zack Eccleston, a graduate student at Vanderbilt Divinity School pursuing his master's in theological studies. Zack went to Lipscomb University for his undergraduate, where he majored in worship ministry, an interdisciplinary major in both theological studies and in music. He's also a musician, having grown up playing the piano and singing in the choir, and singing in worship settings in college. Zack identifies as gay, with the gender pronouns he, him, his, and worships in the Church of Christ now. Zack's story evokes honesty in exploring his identity as a man at a young age, as well as curiosity in his understanding of the Bible. For him, music is a tool that has helped him express this journey as it unfolds. As a warning to parents or younger listeners, we discuss some adult situations early in this episode, so if you jump ahead by just about 6 minutes, you'll be just fine. And now, let's take a listen. So let's dive in terms of how you identify in the LGBT community. Tell me about, when did you first know?
Well, I first understood that I wasn't straight when I was in 9th grade, and I was falling into the pattern that many young adolescent men find themselves falling into of looking at things on the internet that they shouldn't be. And I realized that the things I was looking at were not images of women, but of men. And that really freaked me out.
Did you realize that at the time?
I realized that I was looking at men. I didn't.
Did you make that connection?
No.
Okay.
I didn't know what was happening.
Okay.
I just knew that that wasn't supposed to be happening.
Yeah.
And so I've been very blessed with parents that are awesomely understanding, not always celebratory, but they're always loving and respectful and do their best to understand. And so I went to them with that.
Okay.
And I told them what was happening, and they were mostly annoyed because I did it when I couldn't fall asleep because I felt so guilty at 1 a.m. They were like, Zach, we're trying to sleep. That was their primary response.
You went to them one night at 1 a.m.
I did.
This. And this was still in 9th grade?
Yeah.
Okay.
Their primary response was just
go back to bed.
Inconvenience. But they were very affirming that I'm still loved and that I'm still their son, but that we have some things to work through, which was very true. So they helped me in the ways that I thought I needed help, which was like software that would prevent me from going to certain websites.
Okay.
But of course, I am a millennial, if not the step after millennial, because no one knows where that line is.
What that's going to be, yeah.
And I, of course, found ways around it.
Right.
And so when I kept going down that road, it kept driving me into this place of like shame and confusion and just general anxiety. And so when my parents realized that I didn't feel like I was worthy of being loved or that God could even love me, they were like, all right, yeah, no, we need to get you to counseling. And I really didn't want to go because of the stigma attached to it.
The stigma that the counseling would be to change you, or?
No, just the stigma of going to counseling at all.
Okay.
Of needing help.
In terms of the mental health space in general.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I kind of pushed back against it, but they convinced me to go. And we tried out a couple different people. And we landed on one guy, and he kind of helped me process what was going on. And it started a lot farther down than I thought it did. My shame was mostly coming from my inability to identify as a man, of not feeling like I was masculine or strong or anything that I thought a man should be.
Yeah.
And a lot of that stemmed from I was molested when I was 8 by a neighbor who he was one of my friends at the time, a couple of years older than me. But it really affected the way that I viewed myself. I always kind of thought I was at fault. And so that,
Oh, jeez.
yeah, it was not great. But it kind of carried throughout everything I did. I didn't really trust other guys my age. I hated locker rooms. Because it just felt vulnerable. Bathrooms as well. And then I mostly was just friends with girls because they were safe. I understood how to exist around them. They weren't going to try and take advantage of me.
Yeah.
And so when I went to counseling, we kind of tried to work through that. It started the second half of my 10th grade year.
Okay.
And continued throughout high school. But yeah, we focused primarily on getting over the shame that I had attached to that, understanding that what had happened was not my fault, and that I could name it as being molested, and not just say like I messed up and this happened, or that I did something to lead to this, that it was something that I was not at fault at.
Yeah.
And so once we got over that hump, we focused on my self-conception, and that dealt more with my sexuality. But we tried to focus on just identifying myself as masculine. And so I realized through that process that there are things about myself that are very strong. For instance, the way that I fight for my friends and the things that I believe in, the way that I love people and want to protect them, like are all things that I had never considered before as masculine. But when we thought about it in like this warrior perspective, it really reoriented a lot of the other ways I see myself. I was able to look at the things that I liked about how I was and to understand them in a way that made me feel like I was a man.
Yeah.
And so that was very healthy and important for me, especially as I was about to go to college, to be able to feel like there was this fundamental part of my identity that was centered in being a man. And so when I went to college, I still didn't really have a firm grasp on my sexuality.
Yeah.
I didn't really know how I identified. I really wanted to like girls.
Yeah.
Both because I'm really good at being friends with girls,
Sure.
but then also just because it's what's expected. Like, I'm a guy, so I should like girls. And I think I managed to make myself like some girls a couple times.
Yeah.
I think I managed to force it because I tend to be emotionally in tune with women. It's easy for me to read them and to understand what's going on with them, just because I tended to gravitate towards them and be friends with them.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, that's not a catch-all by any means. There are plenty of women that I just do not understand.
Zack understands all women.
Come to me. I will solve all of your problems. Not at all.
Yeah, be careful with that.
But so the friends that I had tended to be women because I understood them. And so I really wanted to have that translate into a romantic aspect as well.
Sure.
But it just never worked because I was never physically attracted to them.
Yeah.
I was able to say, wow, you are beautiful, but I have no interest in saying anything other than that. Yeah. Or doing anything other than just complimenting you. Like, that's the extent of my physical reaction to you.
Yeah.
And so I had this like pull to say, okay, well, I guess I'm bi, because like emotionally I'm kind of attracted to women, like I'm really close to them, but I do still have this physical attraction to men, and it wasn't really until I guess my junior year of college that I studied abroad for a semester and I didn't click with the guys on my trip.
Okay.
Through college, I had made a lot of guy friends and really cemented my view of myself in my masculinity, and then really grown comfortable in the ways that I express femininity as well. But when I went abroad, it was with a group of Lipscomb students. There were, I think, 30 of us, and we were in Austria for 3 months, and I did not click with the guys at all.
Yeah.
And so I ended up hanging out with mostly girls again, and it felt like a huge step back for me. Okay. Like I had made so much progress of investing in relationships and friendships with men and hanging out with them and understanding myself as someone who wants to be seen as a man, I guess.
Yeah.
That I felt like it was regressive for me to now just hang out with only women for 3 months in a foreign country where I didn't speak the language, and we were doing like extensive traveling. So I spent a 10-day trip going through Scandinavia with 3 girls, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
I loved it. But it would have been kind of cool to also have a guy there apart from me. And in that experience of feeling like I was stepping back, it felt lonely and isolated, I guess. Like there's value and benefit for me of being very close with women. I don't feel necessarily as fully seen, I guess, by people who are not men. And I think it's just like a fundamental identity thing. Like I really identify with people who are LGBTQ because I identify as LGBTQ, and so I in my masculinity, I don't feel like I can be as fully seen by women as I can by men. So when I don't have a close relationship with people who identify with what I identify with, it feels like I'm not as seen. But in the midst of all of that feeling like I was unseen, I learned to lean more into my faith.
Okay.
That was constant in the midst of all of this shifting and instability. And so I learned to trust a lot more that God was going to remain constant in my life regardless of what happened. And so I did start coming out to some of the girls on my trip as gay. And they were all really awesome about it.
Yeah.
And really positive. And in doing so, especially in an environment that I couldn't run away from it after I did it, I was stuck with them.
Yeah.
In a foreign country, like I can't just
for weeks and weeks. Yeah.
can't just go home.
That's bold.
Yeah. So that kind of gave me the confidence once I came back to Nashville to start coming out to people that I trusted and the people that I cared about, and do so as a gay man, and claim that identity.
Yeah.
And so I was in Greek life, and I came out to my social club, which is what we call our quote-unquote fraternities or sororities at Lipscomb. They're only local. They're not national chapters or anything.
Okay.
And then additionally, fraternity and sorority comes loaded with so many connotations. So social club it was, I guess. So I came out to my social club, and I got nothing but positive and affirming reactions.
Yeah.
And shockingly, that was the entirety of my experience of being gay at Lipscomb, is that I never had a negative reaction.
That's amazing.
And it is, because I know people who did not have that experience in that same school.
Sure.
But after coming out to my club, they still elected me to officer positions. And of course, once you tell a group of 40 guys at a small Christian school something, like, it's gonna get out.
Yeah.
And so, like, plenty of people knew. And I didn't shy away from telling them if it felt relevant. If I was talking about something where it mattered, I'd just say, well, I'm gay, and so this, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And in spite of that, or maybe even because of that, I was elected to SGA my senior year. And so even though I was navigating kind of this conservative college environment, as a queer person, I was still accepted and respected and viewed as a leader. And I think a lot of that has come from how I identify as part of the LGBTQ population, of claiming this identity and saying I defy the expectation that this eliminates me from a faith. From a faith at all, but then a faith community centered around Christianity, even if it's conservative.
Yeah.
I'm going to claim that for myself, and I'm going to go live through it and live in such a way that you will see the validity of my faith and my personhood and my God image in me. And that hopefully in doing that, I will open your heart and expose you to some other way of thinking about queer people and the potential that there is for them in faith. I think I've always tried to navigate through the world. That's a phrase I go back to a lot, of like the way that I walk through or navigate through the world. Has always been trying to identify myself as a Christian and as a human. And those are the two labels that I will claim as nouns. But then everything else I want as an adjective. I don't want gay or queer to become my identity.
Your sole identifier.
I want it, I want it to be something that definitely is fundamental to who I am, but is not central.
Yeah.
That definitely influences the way, or I guess the perspective I have as I walk through the world, but not the vehicle that I move through it in.
You seem like you handled so much of this very maturely over time. I mean, in that you asked questions and you went to a lot of good resources, and that's not. I don't know how common that is.
Yeah. I wish it was able to be more common, and I feel like a lot of it stemmed from the way that my parents raised me and the environment that they raised me in. My mom she was an elementary and high school guidance counselor.
Okay.
And so she's used to stories that have run the gamut of everything. Sure. And just showing acceptance and concern and love to people. And then my dad is such a research-oriented guy that he just wants to know all the information all the time about everything. And so he rarely passes judgment on anything immediately. So
before it can be scientifically proven.
Yeah. Or like in some way cemented.
Sure.
And so when I come to him with issues, he never is judgmental in response. He just says, okay, well, what do we do next?
Yeah.
And that's how he's been my whole life too. Like, when I came to, he was in the Army. He went to state wrestling in high school. Like, he is your typical conception of like a male, I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
And when I came along and I said, hey, Dad, I want to take piano lessons, he would do the research to find out who I could take from. Or when I came to him in high school and said, hey, I think I want to take ballet class, he researched the shoes that I needed,
That's awesome.
the like outfit and the pieces of clothing that I would need, the places where I could take classes. And so he's always just been like incredibly willing to move with me as I go along. And he's been that way around my sexuality as well. Both of my parents come from more traditional, conservative understandings of faith and theology. And I remember growing up doing those kind of like fielding questions of like...
seeing what they might think about things.
Yeah, I was like, how would you vote on gay marriage? Yeah. Just like that undercover question of how do you feel about me?
Yeah.
And they would say we would vote against it, but if it happens, we're going to respect it. Like, civil unions are an option, so people should take advantage of that. But as most queer people know, that's not satisfying. And so I understood that their faith centered them on this issue, a place other than what I would wish it was. But since then, my dad has poured a lot into researching theologies surrounding the 6 or 7 Bible verses that center around what we now consider LGBTQ issues. Yeah. But there's no way to directly compare them to the situation 2,000 years ago or in ancient Israel.
Yeah.
So it's a struggle for me always to say that those are the verses of the Bible that deal with LGBTQ people, because they don't in the modern conception of that group, of that population. But he's been researching a lot into how theology is viewed by queer people, various arguments for and against, and I think he's coming around to a place where he's going to be more supportive and affirming, I guess. Yeah. And they've always told me that they're going to love whoever I bring home. So I have no worry about them accepting me. There's always this little piece in the back of my mind that's like, well, what do you think about me theologically? But compared to their reaction, that means nothing. Like, they've always just been loving. So I've been very blessed, and that meant a lot to the way that I moved through the world. Goodness, I need to stop saying it. The way that I tried to figure out my sexuality is that ask questions, and I tried to find the people that would help me get there. And because my dad is kind of oriented towards withholding judgment, it translated to me putting like this physical aspect of my sexuality on pause as I just try to figure it out mentally and emotionally and spiritually. Because I was like, there's a lot more important things than what I want to do with a person physically. And I want to figure those out before I try and do that. Which is not how most people do it. And I recognize that, but yeah.
Was there a point in coming out where you felt like you had to take some time and reconcile your sexuality with your beliefs?
Oh, yeah.
Like what?
I didn't.
How did you start to approach that?
At first, I thought I was called to celibacy because of it. When I really started to understand that, like, no, I'm gay. I'm not anything other than just attracted to men. That I was like, well, that just means, I guess, that I've been called to celibacy and singleness. And that phase lasted about a month before I was like, I can't do that. This is not going to work.
So how did you reconcile that?
Yeah. After that, it was a lot of, I think, just seeking out the work that had been done already. I didn't feel anywhere near equipped to form theological arguments or to say that I know what was being said when this was written. And so I looked for the work that people had done surrounding it. Matthew Vines has been particularly influential on how I view Scripture and its relation to my queer identity. And I've also come to a reconciliation since then of realizing that our faith is based, or at least informed by, a book that was written to specific populations in specific times thousands of years ago. And the understandings we have of who we are now are vastly different than the understandings of the people who were being written to. And so it's comforting to me to know that I have both arguments that can kind of give scriptural grounds as to why I feel I'm within the realm of carrying out a intentional, faithful relationship with another man, and still be in the intended creation of God. But then additionally to say that even if I didn't have those arguments, there's a lot of things that we are able to disregard because we recognize that this book was written to very different people than who we are now. And so I can find comfort in knowing that if we can do that with other things, we can probably also do that with this. So I guess the short answer to your question would be that reconciling has been half an act of fighting with and coming to understandings with the Bible, and half just throwing it out.
I'm going to reconcile with this part, and I'm going to ignore this. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, it's been weird because it doesn't feel like I have just thrown out elements of it. Like I've tried to intentionally wrestle with it all, but there's come to this cohesion of understanding that faith evolves and the Spirit moves in new ways. That I don't think the Bible is going to be the ultimate resource for every question. I think a lot of it is going to come from consensus of believers who are trying to do discerning work. And then also like the Bible has always been about a story of the underdog finding acceptance and love and success in the name of God. And I was going to say a bad word. I can get down with that.
Does the Church of Christ have, or at least,
It's
your congregation or in general with other congregations, do they have a certain stance on homosexuality?
nothing that's like, if there's one that's expressed explicitly, it's usually that they're not welcome.
Okay.
But the ones that don't express it explicitly are usually somewhere in the realm of like, you're welcome here and we will love you, but you are called to singleness because of your sexuality.
Okay. So there are conditions on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of caveats that come with existing in those spaces.
That I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
In the Catholic tradition as well. So, okay. So where do you see that heading possibly here?
I'm not entirely sure. I know that they'll land at least accepting, if not affirming. Which, to explain those terms, accepting is usually like, you're welcome here. Like I explained before, you're welcome here with some conditions. If you don't meet those conditions, you can still be here, but like you can't fill leadership roles. You can't really volunteer with ministries. So you can come on Sunday mornings, but that's about it. That's about it.
Yeah.
Affirming is typically an affirmation that if you are in committed monogamous relationship, then that is ordained by God, and that is permissible and in a full reflection of the intended creation of God. So the hope for most LGBTQ people is that churches would be affirming.
What I believe in is going to be sometimes different from where I worship on Sunday and what they say they believe in, word for word or line by line doctrine. But so with that being said, what does your faith mean to you then? Like how does it feed you despite where you may disagree? Why do you go on Sunday?
That's a hard question. And I think part of it, which is just not an answer that I like, but that's an honest one, is because it's just the way I've always done it. But that's certainly not all of it. It's not just because it was handed down to me. I've wrestled with it, and I've come to places where I've realized that I think the teachings of Jesus are the best way for me to understand how to navigate the world and how to interact with others through that, of how to love justice and love. It's taught me more empathy than I think I could garner from most other faiths. And again, this is just I never want to speak for anyone other than myself unless I explicitly say so. And so all of this is just for me. Like, I don't think I'd be able to garner as much empathy from another faith as I have from Christianity, just because of the way that Jesus navigated Rome and Israel at the time when he was around, that I am able to navigate where I am now in America, in the world, and the populations that I exist in. And so I have gathered so much hope and faith and purpose from that story. And like I said earlier, I relate to people who also claim that. And so that's why I go to church, is because I need those people in my life who can reinforce the why behind why I am doing things. That I'm not just doing this because it needs to be done, but that I'm doing it because I believe that it is going to make the world a better place, and that it's going to bring more of the peace and the promise of justice and hope and purpose that I have received into the world. And I'm not going to force any specific thing on someone. I'm just going to hope to make space for them to find that in the way that they need to. But I don't think a lot of people are granted that space. And so that's why I believe and why I go to church and still subscribe to this faith, is because it makes sense to me, I guess. I don't have as eloquent of an answer to this question as I do to some of these others, and I think it's just because it's a cosmic scale rather than just a personal one.
I think it's a great answer. I think, again, I can relate, but I think it's helpful to have that touchstone to go back to, that community of faith, and even that consistency perhaps with the way you worship or what have you, but like just to have that to go back to as a reminder, because it can get really easy to kind of spin off on our own journeys or our own whatever's bothering us that week or whatever we're reading at the moment as kind of taking over our worldview. And it's helpful to kind of to come back to Scripture, come back to the life of Christ and say, okay, this is a good example. Or these people around me are good examples. Or there are other fights they're fighting that are good to keep in mind, or to say those are battles I can't fight. But I see value in that as well.
I think it's also saved me from becoming an egomaniac. I think I definitely have probably a bigger ego than I should. But I think existing in a place of faith that calls me to humility and calls me to things that I wouldn't want to do if I were just on my own without it, has been so helpful to the way that I understand myself as well. It has made me really intentional about what I value and what I need to let go of as I grow up and as I try and figure out more about who I am, which made the way that I decided to try and figure out my sexuality all the more important, is that I didn't want to do it that way. I wanted to just, I guess, act on it. I wanted to date people, and I wanted to hold hands and kiss someone, and it sounds very in my mind when I'm saying it, it sounds childish, and I know it doesn't. I know everyone really relates to that, or most people do. But that was the way that I navigated my faith, I guess, and the way that I understood it, is that I needed to turn away from some things in order to focus on things that mattered. And so in that sense, it has really informed and I think benefited the way that I understand my sexuality, which I think would confuse a lot of people. And I kind of like that.
What do you enjoy now about, whether it's writing music or performing? Like what do you get out of it?
For me, the greatest thing about music is its effect on people, the effect to move people, and to make them feel things either stronger that they already feel, or help them empathize with something they haven't felt. I've always been drawn to music that is like emotionally moving and powerful. And a lot of times that's sad music. My dad never understood it. I was always listening to like ballads and just like morose laments. He'd be like, just listen to something cheerful. Just, I don't know, just smile. And I'm like, I'm not upset. I just love it. And that's kind of translated to the way that I create music as well. Is that I find it's the best way for me to convey those kind of negative spaces that I live in, or those downer kind of situations, or to relate to someone else's negative experiences. I heard it somewhere, and I don't remember where, but when people are happy, they're kind of happy in the same way, and but in your negative emotions, in your sadness or your anger, or your mourning, anything that's like not just the generic happy or positivity, expresses itself in so many different ways. And it's so beneficial to be able to relate to people through those experiences of pain and hardship, in order to relate to them and to understand the way that they see the world. So that's a lot of the times what I try to access when I'm writing or when I'm performing is the emotion of the person that I'm trying to empathize with. I try to inhabit their worldview so I can convey that perspective to other people. And additionally, for me, music is so much about helping others. When I write music, I try and write it in a way that's going to make someone feel like they're not alone, which is what I needed growing up. I feel like a lot of times what people tend to be passionate about is just helping their younger self. Providing what they needed when they were younger, or even right now. Like I still have this need to feel like I'm not just going through it by myself, that I'm not the only one experiencing what I'm experiencing. And so I try and both do that by providing myself as someone saying, I relate to this, but also just offering that to the world.
One of the last questions I wanted to ask was, we've talked about you as a musician, your faith life, and then also coming out. What does, where do all these elements of your life kind of point you to now? Where are you heading? What are you doing?
Yeah. I guess a couple different things. So first is that I'm kind of discerning this call in my life, to that my vocation has to center around something doing reconciliation work between queer communities and conservative communities of faith, which is a little daunting.
I know the feeling.
But those are the conservative environments of faith are the ones that I grew up in and the ones that shaped me, and I believe in them, and I believe in their capacity to love and to accept and to affirm, and so I'm hoping that by existing in them as a queer person, I can humanize my identity as a gay man, and hopefully humanize larger queer populations to people that would otherwise think poorly of us or not even think of us at all. And so I'm hoping to do that work, and I think that's kind of what I'm gathering my graduate education is going to center around, is hopefully developing theology, to go through that and to call others into it as well. I don't think there's a huge population of people that are called to it, but I think that there's more out there, and I want us to find ways to do it together, because it can feel very isolating. But in my art, I think I tend to try to create music from more of a universally inhabitable space. But I also have found myself gravitating more towards poetry, and that I feel readily able to just shove a queer agenda into people's faces.
That's actually really interesting, that switching mediums is switching kind of your messaging.
it's been bizarre to me to unravel that, but I think part of that is form. I feel a lot more free in poetry, to use language the way that I need to. In songwriting, I feel a lot more constricted. Of like I have to fit rhyme and meter, and I need to fit it into specific stanzas of verse and chorus and bridge. But with poetry, I feel just a lot more fluidity and flexibility to move in that. And in that, I also feel like I have more ability to be responsible with the way that I present my queer identity. Since it's not something that's universal. When I'm writing a love song, like it's way easier to just be kind of neutral ground and write in a way that a lot of people can relate to. But when I'm talking about my experience of being a queer person of faith, walking in conservative communities, that
it's a little more specific.
It's a little more specific, and so I want that freedom to be able to dig into the words and the way that I'm using them to kind of uncover this truth that I'm trying to present. And so that's where my creative work has been centering recently, is around poetry, and that's verged into spoken word a little bit as well. But yeah, I've really enjoyed that, and I've really enjoyed presenting that to people as well, because I feel like it's just an authentic representation of me and my heart, and I have found that people respond to it really well, which is exciting, and I think a good way for me to navigate. God, I keep saying it. A really good way for me to communicate, I guess, with people who don't share this identity, of saying, well, here's like this kind of neatly packaged brief image of one experience that I've had, or one emotion that I've had. Read it and understand. And that's helped with talking with people who don't share this identity.
That's great. And I think we all need more of that across political lines, race, sexual orientation, just having those points of access to understanding like that.
For me, it's been so lovely to read poetry from specifically Arabic or also Muslim writers, because they convey such truth that I can understand and feel without knowing how they went through that, without having experienced it myself. And one of the most striking examples for me recently is someone, I wish I knew who it was, and I might look it up later and send it to you. But she wrote, how dare I love a word without knowing it in Arabic. And that was such just a fundamentally powerful concept to me, of like this separation from your roots and from your origin, of loving a concept of a word, and what it means to you and the way that you've lived, but somehow not knowing it the way you should. And yeah, so reading poetry from people who are not how I see myself has been just so incredibly helpful to relating to and empathizing with them.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all that you did.
Yeah, you bet.
And all that you are.
Thank you for inviting me to.
Yeah. Thank you to Zack again for sharing his experiences with us and for being our very first guest on Out Loud. Zack mentioned a few resources throughout the episode that we thought would be helpful, and so we've linked to those in the episode description. This episode of Out Loud was a labor of love by yours truly, but it would not have been possible without help from my fabulous editor and lead consultant extraordinaire, Meg McKellen. Meg also had lots of ideas for our trailer, and so if you enjoyed that preview of our show, you have Meg to thank. To learn more about Out Loud, follow us on social media. Our handle is Out Loud Stories, that's all one word. Or visit our website at outloudstories.com. Tell us what you thought about the episode and let us know you're listening. To wrap up, we have a very special spoken word piece from Zack entitled Despite. Please enjoy, and thanks for listening.
Despite. A word so well intentioned as to direct attention away from the tension that bubbles up between good and bad, like baking soda and vinegar in a science fair volcano invention. A word that's used to say that someone has looked away from the ways that you've failed in order to laud your successes and place laurels on your name. That name that still holds their disdain. They've seen, they know, your failures and your bad should have had you disqualified, but we'll overlook, look around under your undeserving self because we care, despite. Because the alternative is too cruel, and to see ourselves as rude is unbearable, and so we tell that voice inside that it's okay to break some rules. And then we feel like saviors looking down upon the peons, savoring our grip on those whose self-esteem rests in our fingers' tendons, which can rend their souls beyond mending. Until we become receivers of despite. Until we feel their spite sink down, down, down into our bones, their veiled disapproval an anchor tied to feet which stay limp, in the fear that the way they kick might be wrong. But it doesn't take long for us, once we've had one more taste of knowing their fate belongs to us, to turn back and launch point blank that lead-tipped spear which we fear would otherwise point at us. And it drives us to addiction, and we have to get our fix in any which way, any realm of life that'll take it, and it turns out they all do. When we excuse a man who views women as pieces of meat to be sampled at his volition from his actions because we want him in a certain position, and we want to make sure that no one might think that there's a plank in our vision, despite. When a man invites his peers to talk but then turns the lock and his power and influence keeps them from walking out, and he happens to star in that one TV show you love to watch. Despite. When a man loves a man and he's your child and you find him vile for who he is, but you cannot separate the love you have for everything you wish he was from his body. Despite. A word that grants asylum to predators and in the same stroke reminds trans folk that they are not valid unless someone who is allows them to be. It has been said and taught and sold and bought that we are loved without limit by a Father God who lives in heaven despite our sins. But love with an asterisk cannot be unconditional. Love is not a consolation prize, and even though or an averting of the eyes from what could be apprised as a lacking of perfection, love, unconditional love, is held for what exists, always for what is, not what could be but is not. Yet for a section of our congregations, we've reduced a God beyond comprehension to someone who directs attention away from the tension that bubbles up between good and bad, like baking soda and vinegar in a science fair volcano invention. I do not come with answers. I am not a physician who can offer some prescription to rid the body of its sickness, but despite this, I am here. Despite the thousands of despites launched my way throughout my years like lead-tipped spears, I am here. Yet too many spears have found homes in the hearts of too many queers, and God help the ones who threw them thinking it was love. But still, I'm here. And I remain not despite, but because. Because the one who loves without limit found it fitting that because was more important than despite. Because God so loved the world. Because God so loves the world. No asterisks.